What about the threat assessment? You saved money! You saved money to get these people killed, damn you!
India proudly calls itself the world's largest democracy, and its media has long been described as one of the most vibrant and freewheeling. Newspapers in dozens of languages, hundreds of TV channels, and a massive online audience once seemed to guarantee a diverse range of views. But if you ask many Indians today, they'll say the media feels anything but free or independent. Critics argue that much of the Indian media has been captured by a handful of corporate interests closely aligned with the ruling BJP, creating an environment where challenging the government can mean losing one's platform, funding, or even freedom. So, who controls Indian media? And how did we arrive at this point? Let's start with some history. India's modern press tradition dates back to colonial times. Newspapers like The Hindu, Amrita Bazar Patrika, and Kesari fought British censorship while rallying nationalist sentiment. After independence in 1947, the press was seen as the fourth estate, tasked with holding power accountable. But even early on, there were tensions. Indira Gandhi's emergency from 1975 to 1977 remains the starkest example of state censorship in independent India. During those 21 months, the government suspended civil liberties and imposed direct press censorship. Newspapers famously ran blank columns to protest, and the phrase, "when asked to bend, they crawled," became a lasting indictment of that era. Post-emergency, press freedom recovered somewhat. Through the 1980s and 1990s, India saw explosive growth in TV and regional language news, with Doordarshan's monopoly broken by private channels. By the 2000s, there were dozens of 24/7 news channels in English, Hindi, and other languages. Newspapers remained highly trusted. But this expansion also brought problems. Cutthroat competition, sensationalism, paid news scandals where politicians literally bought coverage, and growing dependence on government advertising revenue. Ownership patterns also changed dramatically. Historically, big family-owned groups like the Times Group, owners of Hindustan Times, dominated. But the real shift came with the entry of large corporate conglomerates and politically connected industrialists. Enter the age of billionaires in media. Reliance Industries, led by Mukesh Ambani, is the single biggest example. In 2014, Reliance took effective control of Network 18, one of India's largest news networks, which runs CNN News 18, CNBC TV 18, News 18 India, and a vast array of regional channels. This acquisition raised alarm bells immediately. Critics said Reliance, India's most valuable company with huge interests in petrochemicals, telecom, geo, and retail, now had an unprecedented ability to shape media narratives. Ambani's influence isn't limited to TV. His group supplies critical infrastructure to cable operators via Den Networks and Hathway, and Jio itself has become one of India's largest internet providers, with built-in apps that promote Reliance-owned channels and news. Effectively, Reliance built a vertically integrated media empire spanning production, distribution, and consumption. More recently, Gautam Adani, seen as close to Prime Minister Modi, became India's second major billionaire media baron. In 2022, Adani Group acquired nearly 65% of NDTV, New Delhi Television Ltd., historically known for its critical journalism and independent coverage. NDTV was once seen as India's premier English news channel for serious, often anti-establishment reporting. Adani's takeover was controversial, especially because it used a loan-linked ownership structure many saw as a hostile acquisition. NDTV's founders, Pranoy and Radhika Roy, eventually sold their stake. Since then, critics argue NDTV's tone has become more government-friendly, with key journalists leaving the network. These aren't isolated cases. Media industry research shows that over 70% of India's TV news market, is now owned or controlled by big conglomerates with diversified business interests. And these companies often depend on government contracts or regulatory clearances. In practice, this creates a strong incentive not to anger those in power, and government advertising is another massive lever. The Indian central government is among the country's largest advertisers. Between 2014 and 2022, the Modi government reportedly spent over $500 million on government ads. Newspapers and channels that toe the line can get more of this revenue, while critical outlets are starved of it. This financial dependency is a quiet but effective form of control. The result? Many critics say India's mainstream TV media, in particular, has turned into what journalist Ravish Kumar famously called Godi media, literally lapdog media. The term describes channels that act as cheerleaders for the ruling party instead of questioning it. Prominent Hindi news channels like Republic Bharat, Z News, India TV, Aaj Tak, and even Network 18's News 18 India are often cited as examples. These channels frequently run shrill nationalist programming, focus on Hindu-Muslim controversies, and avoid in-depth questioning of economic distress or government failures. Instead of challenging power, primetime debates often demonize dissenters as anti-national or urban Naxals. Critics argue that such rhetoric creates an atmosphere of fear, polarization, and blind support for the BJP. Prominent TV anchors like Arnab Goswami, Sudhir Chowdhury, and Amish Devgan have been accused of pushing pro-government narratives and stoking communal divides. Meanwhile, voices critical of the government, like NDTV's Ravish Kumar before he resigned, have described newsroom pressures to dilute or avoid tough stories. Online media offers some resistance. Digital platforms like The Wire, Scroll, The Caravan, and Alt News continue to investigate corruption, fact-check government claims, and highlight underreported stories. But they face constant legal threats. The Wire, for instance, has faced multiple defamation suits from BJP-linked figures and corporations, including a high-profile Reliance-linked lawsuit it had to settle. Pegasus spyware revelations suggested Indian journalists were targets of surveillance. Internet shutdowns, over 100 in 2019 alone, also show the government's willingness to control information flow. Meanwhile, press freedom rankings have plummeted. Reporters Without Borders ranked India 161st out of 180 countries in its 2023 World Press Freedom Index, worse than Pakistan or Afghanistan. The organization cited harassment of journalists, violence against reporters, troll armies targeting critical voices, and concentration of media ownership. Even some mainstream editors have admitted to self-censorship. Shekhar Gupta, former editor of the Indian Express and founder of The Print, once observed that many big media houses avoid stories that could anger Modi or the BJP because they fear loss of access, raids, or financial retaliation. Income tax raids and CBI investigations have been used against media owners seen as critical, sending a clear message to others. Ultimately, the story of Indian media today is one of increasing corporate concentration and shrinking space for dissent. Billionaires like Ambani and Adani, with vast interests dependent on government goodwill, now own or influence major channels. Government ad money and regulation give authorities further leverage. And an aggressively nationalist political culture punishes criticism as anti-national. This doesn't mean all media is controlled or that no independent journalism survives. But it does mean the dominant, loudest, and most watched voices often serve power rather than question it. As India heads into more crucial elections, the question of who controls its media and whether citizens can access fair, critical, diverse information will be vital for the health of its democracy. Because at its best, the media is supposed to be the people's watchdog, not the ruling party's megaphone. And that's why the question who controls Indian media is so important, not just for journalists, but for every citizen who cares about democracy itself.